September's meeting with respect to the RUP development at 550 North, 400 West off the Island Road. And we had the public hearing in the last meeting that we had. We will talk through some of that as we go through this. And this, for the primary reason that I'd called the working sessions, I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to discuss some of the September's meeting options and thoughts that we have with respect to this. Do I need to mention, Teresa, since this is being streamed live on YouTube, that it's being recorded and all of that, I assume?
Yes, it is. I just went and started it live, so we're good to go.
All right. There were a couple of things that I wanted just to correct in the minutes. Two of them typos and one just a clarification. So let's do that. And if anyone else has anything that they discovered as they read through the minutes, let us know. But I'm hoping that when we get to the public session, and Steve, you can correct me if we can't do it this way, but just all the revisions as discussed, and approve it that way, as opposed to going through paragraph 2, last sentence, whatever, those kinds of things. So I don't know if that's appropriate to do it that way in the session or not.
I mean, if they're just typos, that's fine. It just depends on how in depth you go on a clarification.
Okay, well, let's get there then. So this is on item number 1 in the minutes, paragraph 2, the last word of the second to last sentence. It says the meeting and was unable to obtain audio instead of audio. So that's just a typo. In the middle of the next paragraph, and let me know if you don't see those. The middle of the next paragraph, there's a sentence that says the subdivision is a concept drawing indicating a subdivision is pliable. I wasn't sure if the word was meant to be pliable, but I thought it was supposed to be viable.
Oh, yes.
And then 2 sentences later, it says the development is consistent with the general plan and reflexes instead of reflex.
Okay.
And then everything else read pretty well until we get down to the discussion section. So that was the public hearing section. Now we go to we close the public hearing, go to the discussion section. In the second paragraph, it says, with that in mind, do we have a patchwork type fell as the use around this area is mixed? And that I think that's supposed to read feel.
Okay.
Not patchwork type feel. And then the last thing that I wasn't sure, because I haven't listened to the recording, can't remember exactly everything I said, but the fourth paragraph in that discussion says, Nathan stated from the public hearing comments as well as commission review, the development is within the general plan and is not a concern, which is probably a direct quote. And this is where the clarification comes in that I was talking about, Steve. It's not a direct or a concern with respect to what the general plan allows for, which is what I meant and not what it kind of reads. But I didn't want to make it sound like I don't have any concerns at all. that it was a stamp of approval kind of a thing.
Yeah. So you're saying it's not a concern because it's consistent with the general plan?
That it's not a concern with respect to the general plan provisions.
Because it's consistent with the general plan.
Correct.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's not in depth enough. I think that you could proceed without having to go through those in detail.
And that's it. So that's what I picked up when I read through these. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Moving into the other agenda items. We have 23 minutes. I wanted to spend the majority of that on items 2 and 3, if that's okay. Not that the signage isn't important, But if we don't get a chance to, address that before the public session, then that's fine. So the rezone request that the RUP development has brought before us 2 months ago, we had the public hearing. We're at the point tonight where we don't need to reopen any type. There's not a follow-up public hearing. We'd left that 2 months ago with a request for the RUPs to consider changing the density that they had drawn up in their concept plan and their vision for the project. And because of that request, we didn't take any action and make any recommendation to the city council last session. They have come back with the application with the same request, the same zoning request, which is the R110. So we're 2 months in, down the road, and that's what's on the table before us. So we have a couple of actions that we can take as we go through this. We're basically picking up the discussion exactly where we left it 2 months ago, and we have the duty to make a recommendation to the city council, either a favorable recommendation or an unfavorable recommendation, based on the uses of the request being R110, which is, as I just discussed from the minutes that were read from my quote, is consistent with the general plan. What's less consistent are the immediately adjacent properties. So even though on paper it fits, in reality there are a number of mixed uses and lot sizes with agricultural uses and R120 uses, and then I think there's a couple of acre lots right across the street on the 400 from 400 West. So those are the challenges that to me are worthy of discussing and considering as we make this recommendation to the city council to determine where we fill. So I want to open it up there for the rest of the commission to pose any questions and air out any other thoughts as we prepare for the public session 7.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
if I could just make a short comment.
sure.
Just for clarification, this was brought up to me and this was a good point to address. If you look on my memo, there is a chart that shows you a general breakdown of zones and gives you a general unit per acre count with a 20% deduction for public right-of-way. The account for the proposed subdivision I've got listed at 2.6 units per acre, but that does not account for 20% taken out for roadway. So if you include that, it would bring the proposed development to 3.22 units per acre and not the 2.6 that I have listed.
Okay, so it's a clarification. 3.2, not 2.6. That's on page 19 of 21 in the packet. Thank you. I guess one thing procedurally that I would just like some guidance on, if we could. We've had a couple of instances where we've made some zoning changes. We went through the public hearing process, and the recommendation has been favorable. I personally haven't been in a situation if there's one that the recommendation is unfavorable. And I'm not suggesting that that's what we do here. I'm just curious procedurally how that works. How do you frame something like that? And is it just we make a motion that we don't recommend that the city council change the zoning to R110? How does that work? I'm just curious.
I mean, remember the planning commission represents the code itself. And so your recommendation needs to basically be in line with that. Now, if you've got some concerns, obviously you can express those as well. And whether you say that you approve and these are some concerns that we have, or whether you say maybe our definition of low density is too broad and that should be narrowed. You may recommend that that the city council enter into some type of a development agreement to ease the concerns regarding transitions. I mean, obviously, the determination is whether it's consistent with the current zone and the general plan. With the current general plan, and make that recommendation. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't put some notes there for them to consider, evaluate the application.
Sure, and that's exactly my point. Is clearly it's not it wouldn't be unfavorable just because people don't want it. It'd be unfavorable because of some of the reasons that you'd outlined, and that's I guess the question and why we have a commission and why we have discussion. If it were all just procedural and a stamp of approval, then there's no reason to have a public hearing because it's a foregone conclusion. It's consistent with the general plan, and therefore we can talk about it, but the outcome's going to be given.
Oh, and that's why the planning commission's role is apolitical, because you represent that. But when you come across these applications that might cause you some concern, then that gives you some insight on how you can amend the code to address those concerns. And you may send up a proposal for an amendment to the city council. They may say, no, it is. And so you've been given that direction. On the other hand, they would want to receive that input so that they can also evaluate any potential needed changes to the code.
Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful. Thank you. With respect then to this particular project, I do want to hear, and some of this will be redundant in the next session, but hear what some of those concerns may be, if there are any. If they're not, then then it'll be pretty quick as well. But I've expressed the one that for me is a challenge, and that is that the adjacent properties that are already developed, some of them are new, some of them are legacy properties, all sit on larger lot sizes, even though the zoning or the general plan calls for R110. So that's something that remains something for me that I still trying to reconcile, where it doesn't have that smooth buffering. Not that every city is going to have just this natural highest density in the middle, and it fans out very easy and softly through the different densities until you have very low density. I recognize there's going to be some choppiness when it can be planned for. Then it feels a little bit a little bit more like something that's consistent, not just on paper, but also in practicality. This is one that feels like we'd be creating an island of higher density housing surrounded by lower density housing, and just it feels a little off to me. And that's something that I think I'm trying to understand how that fits in with the whole code, the whole code component of this. So I'm curious where other people stand on this, and where your thoughts are.
Yes, I'll go. I kind of echo a lot of your concerns. I just, depending on what our general plan update and all that does, we could end up with this little patch of higher density. Then I guess it's probably okay, and it's probably something that can happen. But when you go down to the Dave Rich's letter from the fire department, you know, it's 6 lots over current code of 30 lots on a dead end street. However, 400 West will eventually tie into Young Street. And I think, at what point do we, well, eventually this will happen, so we'll just do this. I mean, it either does tie in or it doesn't. It either meets the code or it doesn't. I mean, if there was a water line that needed upsize for a development, they wouldn't say, oh, well, someday that'll be upsized, but we'll let the development happen now. And we'll someday. I kind of struggle with that a little bit, because where do you draw the line that someday, you know, it'll happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think as a principle, you know, again, just to Steve's guidance, we need to make sure that we're upholding the ordinance of the city as they stand. That being said, it also feels like every development should be, should be dependent on existing infrastructure and not future infrastructure that could be 2 years out, but it could be 20 years out. And I'd rather not hamstring the infrastructure on something that will happen down the road, as you'd mentioned.
Could
Mr. Chair.
not happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody has a crystal ball what's going to happen next year. Who knows? The economy could fall through. We might not ever see this connection that we're anticipating. I'd like to know if we can vote on a moratorium for any development until we get the general plan done, because this doesn't fit in with our general plan as we're talking about. That's what everybody's saying. This development doesn't fit in. I'd like to see a moratorium until we get the general plan done that we're currently working on, starting right now, and then go forward. That's my thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, this is George.
Hi, George.
Good evening. This is the first time this afternoon as I got into looking at this that I had seen this. I agree with you from a number of standpoints. Yes, we're putting this right next to something that has much larger lots. But the other thing that I wondered in this case, and thinking ahead down the road, do we have enough water to put that kind of density in all of that area down there? What's that going to do to our roads and capacity to handle the traffic? I think we need to look at some of that. If we need to change the overall city plan, then I don't think I'm afraid of trying to do that.
I can't answer the water question. I guess the question I would have is, regardless, does that become a relevant factor for this body? Now, I think it's a relevant factor for other city entities, but from a planning purpose standpoint, I don't know if that's in scope.
I didn't expect you to give an answer. It was just something that came to mind as I was looking at these density issues and thinking all of what might come into play. No, I'm not asking you to answer that.
There may be others on this call that do have that answer, but I wanted to address Jim's thought too real quick. But Steve, you just went off mute. You're going to respond to that?
Only if you give me a minute. So several issues have come up as of late. One thing that you do have to remember is that when an application is submitted, is submitted, they are vested in the existing rules and regulations in place at the time that application is submitted. And so putting in any type of a moratorium at this point in time would not be advisable based on that vesting. The other thing, there were utilities that were mentioned. The city also has what we call a concurrency ordinance, which means that a development cannot be approved unless there are sufficient utility capacities there. And that's the the processes that you have, each of these applicants go through, meeting with the water board, et cetera. And so those protections are in place to ensure that a development there is sufficient capacity, not just capacity, but also the ability to service this area, which may impose upon the developer a requirement to chase whatever facilities they might need to bring into their area to make it a viable development.
Thank you. And that does kind of spark another thought, just based on what Jim, what you had shared. Maybe a moratorium is not advisable at this point. However, to me, the circumstances of the day are that our general plan was last updated in 1999, I believe. So it's 21 years old. We know this. We were actively reworking the general plan. Now a contractor has been secured, and that's underway, knowing that it no longer reflects perfectly the vision for the future. And I think this is one example that might be an argument for 21 years ago, before the other subdivision across the street on 400 West had gone in. Maybe this is a little bit different, but there's been development that's come in the surrounding properties that have, even though the general plan from 21 years ago called for one thing, and today that's still what's in place, that it no longer reflects the vision and the usage of the current, the adjacent properties, and so that may be something. And
if I could address that, you're right, Mr. Chair. And so I didn't mean to speak broadly as in we should never do a moratorium. I'm just saying a moratorium would not have an impact on this application. But that doesn't mean that if you look and realize that there's going to be some significant changes in the general plan, that you couldn't do some type of a moratorium. But under state law, those are limited to only 6 months. And so you would want to make sure that the general plan was going to be updated and completed within that period of time. Now, that's not to say that those couldn't be extended, but it's got to be a reasonable period of time. And so once that contract is let, we can see what's going on. But in the meantime, you're right. The city does need to protect itself until the general plan is updated. But just my comments with regard to the moratorium were just applying to this application that's already in the hopper.
Okay, thank you. And we have just a couple of minutes before we open the general session. Ty, do you have a quick comment on, do we have a time frame yet for the general plan revision as far as a completion date when it would be adopted?
So the contract is for the end of 2021. So December of 2021 is when the deliverable.
Okay, so in deliverable, that means in product, but not necessarily fully adopted through the city council.
Yep. Yeah, and it's up to us to adopt it on our own time frame.
Okay.
So if we don't like what we received, or we still want reworks, or we decide to, take things a step further past the contractor, it's up to us when it gets adopted.
So even if we took an aggressive stance and went with a moratorium type of approach, July 1st of next year would be about the soonest we could even think about that, and then there still could be a gap in early January and February before this thing gets adopted.
Isn't there already a construction moratorium that starts in October? So we'd only have to do it from April to October, then nothing could happen until we got it done.
I'm not aware.
No, there's not a construction. No, construction can still happen. We just don't take conditional acceptance or final acceptance during the winter of new developments. But they're still going to be building homes, and that's on their schedule. We just don't inspect, and we don't take ownership of the new developments until April. So.
Speaking of development, somebody else hit me up today. What happens to a bankrupt HOA? Where does that fall on the city?
It doesn't. It is still the responsibility of the underlying property owners to make it viable.
So if an HOA bellies up and all the houses become untenable, that's just what we look at. I mean, that's what we drive by. I mean, it becomes an eyesore to the community. It's their responsibility still. I'm just hypothetical. I get it, but I'm just kind of curious because I've had a couple of people ask me, Dave, what happens next year if the economy goes south and a bunch of people, the HOAs can't function and can't repair homes or whatever. I'm just curious more than anything. So thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
in the comments, it looks like Jay Eckett has a comment to make. Maybe we could do that prior to the general.
All right, Jay, you've got 60 seconds.
Awesome. Hey, in the memo from the Rupp property, the three things that came to my mind from last meeting and this meeting is first, it looks like the fire code was addressed. I remember that being an item in my mind, and it looked like the fire marshal has addressed that at a satisfactory level. So I felt like that was satisfied. There was another comment about removing the cul-de-sac. I do recall the city management talking about those cul-de-sacs being a burden. And when I looked at I'm not sure if I'm looking at an older plan or if it's been revised, but the one I'm looking at, it still seems to have these cul-de-sacs in them. And so I'm not sure if that was actually addressed or not, but I felt like that was kind of an issue on the burden of the city to plow those roads. So that would be a comment. And then the broader comment that I had was, I know that those folks that live down on Island Road right now feel that they're out in the country and they've got their large lots and their horse property and things like that. And just in a long-term view, as I look at that and I look at the future, we have very limited space here. And when I look at that and go, from the 10,000 foot level, the reality is, and there's one drawing in there that has the red lines coming across and connecting back over to the Young Street. And that really gave me some perspective. Even though those folks that live down there now feel that way, probably in our lifetime or in our
Yeah,
children's.
I'm going to have to cut you off. It's time to start our general session. Your comment, if you don't mind saving that, you can still make it once we get to that point in the agenda, if that's okay. With that, Teresa, I think we're ready to kick off our general session. So let me do that now. I want to welcome everybody to our November 17th edition of the Morgan City Planning Commission meeting. And thank you all for joining virtually. A number of you are in the actual meeting Zoom and have an ability to interact, and ask that you keep yourself on mute just to minimize background noise unless you're about to speak, at which point feel free to unmute and speak up. If you want to raise your hand or use the chat, you can use that as well to get my attention. But if you just jump in off mute, that'd be fine too. This is also being recorded and streamed on YouTube Live. So keep that in mind as well, that this is potentially viewable around the world through the technology wonders of the internet. So just know that as well. We are ready to jump in. Today we have 3 items on our agenda, and I'll give a quick overview of those in 1 minute. But we have also our minutes to read into the record from our last session, which was September 15th of 2020, when we had a public hearing. We did not meet in October, and here we are in November, ready to review those minutes. So let's start there. And if I could call for a member of the commission to take action and make a motion with respect to the minutes from our last meeting.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that minutes be approved with the minor corrections that were referenced in the work session.
We have a motion to approve the minutes with the revisions as previously outlined. Is there a second for the motion?
This is George. I second that.
George seconds the motion. Anyone have any comments before we vote? Then let's vote. All in favor of approving the motion as outlined. Try to raise your hand or say aye so I can see. See Jay,
Aye.
me. I didn't see Jay or Lance. I didn't see your votes.
Aye.
All right, Lance is a positive. Jay, are you a yay or a nay?
Yay.
All right, unanimous. The 3 agenda items we have for today. The first one is a historic review of signage for Destination Sports. This is a property on 103 North Commercial Street that resides in the historic overlay district, and based on the proposed changes that this project wants to put on their facade of their building, it comes before the Planning Commission for us to review. We will start here. I'm just scrolling back up where my notes are. And before jumping in, just a couple of things to keep in mind. Well, actually, I'd love. Do we have a representative from Destination Sports that could give us an overview? The agenda packet has some pictures of the proposed signage and some diagrams for us to reference. So we've seen those. But is there a representative from Destination Sports on today?
I'm here. Donna Zook, hear me?
Hi, Donna. This is Nathan McClellan. Thanks for joining. Would you mind sharing in your words what you are looking to do with the signage?
Yeah, just above the windows of our new storefront property, I just want the simple words, black text, just so people have an idea of what we're doing there, what we offer with the gear rentals and sales and guide services.
Thank you. So with respect to that, what we're looking to do is just ensure that signs are in proportion and in scale to the building in general, that it doesn't obscure the architectural details or the character of the historic structure by the material or color or details that are being used. Lettering and graphic styles and designs and painted metal signs can all be appropriate. When they're simple designs are preferred. So these are some of the guidelines that we're looking at, just based on what is what is outlined in the historic overlay district. That being said, we've got 4 members of the commission on the call tonight. Myself, Jim Brown, Lance Prescott, and George Hopkin. And thank you so much for sharing the picture. So we now have a visual that we can all see on the screen. What questions do you have for? Now I forgot for Donna.
Donna.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions.
Thanks, Jay. And
The only question
which
I
one
saw
of these
in the
is model?
document.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. The question I saw in the document was about the illumination. We're not planning to do any lighting. We're only going to be open during daytime hours, so I don't see a need to illuminate that sign.
The one thing that I just, thank you. The one thing I wanted to clarify, and is the dimensions of the sign. So in the material we received, it looks like it's 11 inches by 35 inches, or approximately 1 foot by 3 feet. Is that to scale based on this rendering that we're looking at? Because it looks like it's a lot longer, or are you just adding the gear rentals piece to the sales and guides component? And you're on mute, Donna, sorry.
I say that sign is a foot tall, or will be. And I mean, those windows are almost they're like 2.5 feet wide each. So there's something wrong with that measurement. I'll have to go back and look at my,
So it'd probably be
double check
closer
my
to
notes, but
6 to 8 feet in width. then.
yeah, something like that. I think it's 11 feet all the way from the right border of the doorway that's on the left side of the screen over to the far right border on the right side that's next to the drugstore. That's 11 feet total. So the sign would be around 8 or 9. Yeah, something like that.
Thank you for clarifying. That was the one thing when I saw the rendering that I was confused with, so that helps.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
the only thing to be concerned of with that is those were the dimensions provided. So if the dimensions do change or are changed, we just need to be clear that they can have 3 linear feet for every foot of frontage they have for their building. So basically, they take their frontage of their building, times it by 3, and that's how much attached square footage they can have for their sign. So they're probably going to end up around 80 or 90 square feet. And I think we'll be okay, but just so we're aware.
Okay. That's a good clarification as well. Thank you. But with respect to the font, it looks like simple font to me. There's nothing fancy, nothing that would scream that it doesn't, it's not consistent with the surrounding materials or adjacent properties, or the vision of the historic overlay. From my standpoint, just I'm not a, there's a term for those people that are able to develop and discern fonts. I'm not one of them, but it seems consistent to me. Other thoughts from members of the commission?
Mr. Chair, if you go up to it looks like a copied email from Donna to Teresa. I think down where you're looking may be a typo. Up on this email, it looks like it's 11 inches by 135 inches. So that works out to 11.25 feet. So that's probably correct for what's shown. And it says 2.7 square feet or something. So I think it's probably just a typo on our memo.
Okay. That's a good catch. I'm looking at the email, and Donna's note does indicate 135 inches. So we may have transposed that, to your point, incorrectly. Regardless, with the 135 inches, with 80 to 90 feet of frontage, Weston, does that calculate to be within tolerance?
Give me just 1 second and I'll provide that for you.
That sounds good. While he's looking into that, and anything else? I don't have a lot else on my end, other than, if I may, just say thank you for opening up shop in Morgan and on Commercial Street. It's great to see great to see businesses over there.
They should meet the square footage. That'll be fine.
She does meet the square footage. Great, thank you. All right, well, I didn't hear any other discussion on this. Are we ready to move forward with action? If so, I'd like to call for a motion from one of the commission members.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just one point of clarification. It's hard to tell in the rendering, I get it. But is the intent for it to go from corner of the window above and above the one on the right, the poles there, so it kind of gives us an illusion? If you can answer that for me, Donna, I'd appreciate it. Is that the intent?
The intent basically is to be centered above those two windows.
Okay.
And yeah, that was just photoshopped in there. So
No, I get it.
That sign, yeah.
Because it appears that each of those ridges are roughly 12 inches, giving us the approximation of 11 feet. Okay, thank you. I'm good, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion items on this topic before we take action?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I recommend that the commission approve the request for the proposed sign located at 103 North Commercial Street.
Thank you, Jay, for making that motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any discussion on this motion before we vote? Hearing no one jump in with discussion, let's vote on this. If we can do that verbally and visually, I'll try to watch and see what this is, but all in favor of the motion, please indicate.
Aye.
So it's 3. Still don't see Jay.
Aye, J, I. Go ahead.
All right, looks like, and George, I didn't get your vote.
Yes, aye.
Yes, for George. All right, thank you. Sorry that it's a little bit cumbersome to facilitate and try to see what everyone either said or showed. So appreciate your patience. But it looks like that was unanimous. So thank you again, Donna, and that's been approved.
Thank you, everybody.
We'll now move to our second agenda item, which is a follow-up from our meeting 2 months ago when we held a public session regarding a rezone request to move from agricultural to a single-family residential with an R110 designation at a property located at approximately 550 North, 400 West. This is for 11.25 acres to be part of this development. Just for some history, at the time we opened the public session, we had a number of members of the public share thoughts, questions, concerns. Those have been recorded in the public record, and we did not make a recommendation as a commission, as a body, to the city council at that time. What we did is we made a recommendation to the applicant to consider a lower density project, at which time the applicant chose to consider that request, and we tabled the rest of the discussion to make a decision on this until it was put on a future agenda. It's now on the future agenda. The applicant has come back with the same zoning request, which is as outlined, to move from the agricultural designation it is today to the R110 residential designation. So that the same zoning request. We do not need to have a second public hearing because that's already been opened and closed. And at this point, we need to consider the applicant's request in line with the ordinances in place and make a recommendation to the city council. So before jumping into any of this, I believe we do have the applicant or a representative for the applicant with us today. Mr. Rupp, do you or someone at your designation want to just share any additional insight before we move into this?
We'd like to make some comments to begin with. Hang on, we got two computers going here and we've got a little bit of feedback.
That might take care of it. Sounds good now.
First of all,
There we go.
it is clearly our understanding that coming back with our 110 request was in harmony with what transpired in the last meeting.
And Mr. Rupp, if I can stop you for just a minute. When you first started, we could hear you very well, and then you got very quiet. And I don't know if that was just me, but I just want to make sure that everybody that's watching this can hear what you're saying.
Okay, let me ask the question then. Can everybody hear me?
That sounds better. Thank you.
Okay. So with regard to coming back with an improvement or a response to the density issue, it was our understanding that the community wanted us to respond to the density issue, but we did not receive a formal request from the Planning Commission to come back with a reduction in density. So if that's the case, then we apologize, but we still want to proceed with this evening's discussion and a request for rezoning to R110. On that note, the points that we want to make are in fact the points that were made in the planning staff's letter and recommendation. And I'd like to just highlight a few of those points. The first one is that, in fact, and we were listening in on the work meeting, so we'll address some of the issues that were raised there. There has been a new rendering. We did eliminate the cul-de-sac as requested. And so there is an updated drawing, and that should have been part of the packet. Teresa, is that part of what you distributed?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was in everyone's hands. Okay, the second point is that we did set one of the lots aside in order to account for a potential storm drain detention basin. The issue around the fire ordinance has been addressed with Dave Rich, the fire marshal. If we need to, we can go into his letter. There is not as it was expressed in the work meeting, there was some concern over the fact that it was based on when the road was going to continue someday. And that is not what the letter says. The letter says that the water, they can access the well that is right across the street from the detention pond, and it would provide sufficient water to make sure that the homes in this development would be adequately protected. And again, I believe that's under the purview of the fire marshal to address that issue. The other issue is that many of the nearby neighboring properties are in fact zoned 1.8 and 110. While it is true that the one across the street is zoned R120, it would seem to me that the others should be taken into consideration as well. Specifically, the wildflower development, which is more commonly referred to as Larkspur. We were a little confused by Wes's recalculation of the density issue, and so we may need to address that as part of this discussion. The other point that he made is that there are approximately 75 acres beyond our development, which are available for 1 acre developments under the current zoning. And the staff's recommendation or finding is that there is, because of the cost of land and the size of the lots, there's probably insufficient demand to consume all of that land. And so the the natural conclusion from that is that there does need to be some smaller lots available to the populace who is interested in living in this area. And then finally, clearly states that the zoning request does in fact meet the conditions of the general plan. And if I understood correctly from the work meeting, it is the general plan that should, and I don't know whether you call them ordinances or whatever, but that they should drive the decision and the recommendation of the commission rather than the opinion or the desire of the neighbors across the street. One of the other key factors that we'd like to mention is that there is an added benefit, and it's seen throughout Morgan time and time again, that comes to a neighborhood and a community that comes from economic diversity. There's nothing to say that there's an advantage to having half-acre or 1 acre lots mixed with quarter-acre lots is a bad thing. In fact, the diversity, the economic diversity that comes from that, the affordability for young families that would interact with older, more established families is actually a blessing to the community rather than a threat to the community and the ultimate attempt to direct the development that occurs. Consequently, what we're requesting is that the Planning Commission act on the planning staff recommendation, which is the final note in his letter, to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council to approve the rezone request. And I'm looking at my notes here, and I also wanted to address the issue that came up about a question about water capacity. Back in, I believe it was February of this year, we started this whole process by sitting down with all of the key departmental heads within city administration, one of which was those who were responsible for water, those sewer, roads, all of that, and inquired at that time whether there was any issue over the capacity of the system in order to accommodate this development. And in that meeting, there was no concern over water or any of the other utilities in servicing this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rupp. I appreciate you sharing the context and addressing some of the things that I heard during the working session. Let's discuss this as a body. Just a couple of clarifications just to make sure that we're all aligned. And as has been discussed a couple of times, this Planning Commission is an apolitical recommending body to uphold the ordinances or the code of Morgan City with respect to any planning concerns that come in with new developments and changes to existing developments and so forth. And so that's exactly how we want to approach this, is looking at the existing ordinances of the city, how this project lines up with that. And so I appreciate the sharing of that. Let's chat about this as a commission and discuss some of the open items and questions that are still on people's minds as we evaluate what recommendation to make.
Mr. Chair, I couldn't see exact frontages, but for example, what's the lot, the one in the bottom left-hand corner off that circle? What's the frontage on that? 30 feet, 40 feet? I can't tell. Down, Teresa, please. Keep coming down, two more. Yeah, those two right there. What is the frontage on that? Like 30 feet, 40 feet?
Sorry, Mr. Brown, which?
Yeah, Teresa was there. Yeah, right there where she's at. I can't tell. What's the frontage on that? Like it appears maybe what, 30, 40 feet. I don't know.
I can't tell you, can't zoom it in enough to read it.
That's why I was asking. I couldn't see mine either when she's
Yeah, and
sent it to me. I can't tell from the drawings. I'm shooting blind here, I guess.
I believe that one shows 34 feet. It's hard to see where the frontage is in a green color.
I thought we had a minimum of at least 80 feet. I know we talked about 100 feet would be desirable. I thought the minimum was already 80 feet.
I think in an R110 it is 80 feet. Now that curve data table may give the actual distance of that frontage. I just can't read it at this.
So, Mr. Chair, Weston could probably clarify how those curve tables happen and what the vision is of a concept plan.
Weston, if you wouldn't mind jumping in and sharing that context, that'd be great.
So they will, as this moves forward and they go through preliminary, they will have to meet all the plan requirements for the subdivisions and for the zone. So I'm just pulling up the tables now, and for the R110, there's a minimum of a 70 feet frontage, and they'll take that at chord length. So there will be allotments given. This is a concept, so as they go to submit preliminary and work through that, there will have to be some changes just based on frontages requirements, potential lot sizes. Maybe a corner lot needs to be wider than what's presented. This really is to just give you a general idea of the number of lots and general position of roads and what the lots could and subdivision could potentially look like. But they would, before they could get preliminary approval, have to meet all the frontage and setback and zoning requirements for that specific zone.
Well, isn't that the next item is preliminary? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to jump ahead on the agenda, but isn't that the...
So what's before you today is the rezone request and the concept plan or the sketch plan. If that moves forward through you and through City Council, their next step would be to present a preliminary plan.
Guess I'm used to seeing a concept sketch a little bit more what would fall in line with code, I guess. I thought that's what we usually get, but maybe I'm wrong.
But I think the point is valid from the standpoint of as the project progresses, it will need to comply with those existing ordinances, the frontages, the setbacks, the whatever is in the code that as the plans evolve, we'll need to incorporate that. If it materially changes the concept, then I would imagine then there'd have to be a new concept submitted. What other observations, questions as you look through this? There's one comment I was thinking about that I want to address, and that is, again, it's understood that the R110 request is provided for in the existing general plan. It's also known that the general plan is 21 years old and is actively being redone as we speak. The adjacent properties, the one to the west of 400 West that has, I believe I got the direction right, but the newer development over there with the larger lots, and then the applicant referred to the R18 lots that are also adjacent. Those may be on paper what's allowable. How they're being used today is not in that case. And so what would have to happen for the adjacent properties to all reflect that R18, even though it's allowable, there'd have to be gentrification coming in, either subdividing these, having flag lots, behind each one of these lots, tear down the house, do something different, and you buy up the whole street. There'd have to be some pretty serious effort to turn those from the existing uses to the allowable use of R18. So from when I look at it, even though there's 75 acres to the, to the, I think it's to the west, below the property there, the other three sides of the property are abutted by larger uses. That's the practical reality of what we're looking at, and I agree that a mixed use can be a beautiful use. When you go into a subdivision and you've got big lots and small lots and deep lots and shallow lots and irregular shaped lots and different things, creates variety that can make a very nice street appeal, curb appeal type of subdivision. And I agree with that. When they're intermingled that way, when they're all clustered together, that effect is sometimes lost and so loses some of its power. So those were a couple of thoughts that I had. I like the concept as laid out. I'm still just concerned with the fact that it's tucked in here as a different use than the surrounding uses. I shouldn't say different use, different density than the surrounding densities, even though the general plan allows for it. And that's my concern.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
this is Jay.
go ahead, Jay.
I just have a comment to that point. I guess what my thoughts are about that is just a longer view than current, than 2020. I'm thinking like 2120, right? The vision of the city. And as I scale back to 10,000 feet, all of Morgan City one day is going to be downtown Morgan City. Right now, I would assume those people down Island Road and in those areas have felt like they're out in the country. They have got lots of land. They've got horse property. They've lived in a time in Morgan's history when high density wasn't a factor. But that's going to change, and it's going to change quite quickly. And so as I look at it from just a vision only, just what do I see the future of our city, and I scale back, and especially the map that's included, it's page 20 of 21 in the agenda. And you kind of get the visual of how those roads will come and wrap and turn and connect back into those new developments that are being developed, and those existing developments are being developed. And as I look at that view in the future, this is not an area in the future that is out in the country with horses. And so I understand those folks on 400 West that have those properties, and I understand your comments about those bigger properties. But with my eye on the future, I feel like this neighborhood is actually quite in line with what the future is of that area. You can see kind of to this, over towards Young Street, you see the density over there. It looks a lot higher. The homes are a lot closer. The lots are a lot smaller. And really what the Rupps are looking to build is just an extension of that. They're just ahead of they're 100 years ahead of the curve, right? If they were closer to Young Street, it may seem a little more acceptable than it does being over towards Island Road. And so all I would say to that is, I just feel like my vision in 100 years from now is in more support of, hey, they do meet that. This is going to be downtown Morgan City one day. And I don't personally oppose that density, even though I understand some people would feel differently than that. But, if they're in line with the current code, and I can see that vision in the future, I think they're ahead of the curve there. So.
Mr. Hackett, thank you for your comments. We did have a chat comment from Weston that clarified that 80 feet for a standard lot, but does allow 70 on a cul-de-sac or a knuckle as far as frontage is concerned. So that was an earlier question that was raised. Weston, thank you for following up on that. We still don't know what the exact dimension was on the concept that we looked at, but at least that clarifies the requirement. So Jay shared his thoughts. Any other thoughts for discussion as we consider this proposed project?
Mr. Chairman, we would just like to also let the committee know that we do have a list of a lot of families who are interested in smaller lots.
Yeah, thank you for that. I certainly can't speak for any of the market analysis, those kinds of things, other than looking at some of the demand. A list could be produced for people that want larger lots as well. I could produce that as a counter rebuttal if we needed to. But when I look at the economics and a development perspective, you can have a 10,000 square foot lot and another 10,000 square foot lot, and you have to build the infrastructure and stub in the utilities, and you might sell each one of those for $130,000. Or there's a premium lot for sale in Morgan City right now that's an acre, and it's $450,000. And the properties that can go on that generate more property tax. There's less infrastructure and development build, and more revenue initially in selling that. So I'm not an economics expert, but that argument doesn't necessarily weigh into anything, because you can make money either way, high end or low end.
Mr. Chairman, I did have one other just random question. It was more for Ty, just as a curiosity, if that's okay. And it's in regards to this community, so it's relevant.
Please share.
I do appreciate and I do recognize how the concept plan did eliminate the cul-de-sac there, and I see how they did that. And so thank you for addressing that issue. From the September agenda to this agenda. And I guess what I was thinking, at one point, I think I had in my database in my mind that the cul-de-sacs on the city's snow removal equipment was a burden. And so I was conscientious of that. But I also wondered, with these circular kind of what they've evolved into now, and we have some of those in my neighborhood, and I wonder if Ty is the person to answer that, but what are the feelings of that? As far as I like them personally for like kids not being in the road as easy, or more space to turn around or things like that. But are there any general feelings as far as the maintenance goes on those kind of circular kind of half cul-de-sacs versus the full cul-de-sac, Ty?
I'll defer to Lance.
Well, if I may, I'll take, you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. If I may, I'll take my planning commission hat off and put my Morgan City Streets Department hat on for just a second. Cul-de-sacs are a pain for snow removal, maintenance. When I saw the updated drawing, I know eliminating the cul-de-sacs, or the cul-de-sac, but by adding these 3 bulbs, and this isn't really something I think that we address in planning commission. That'll be something when it goes to, public works reviews. I think those 3 little bulbs will double the snow removal time for this street. And I understand they do that to get more frontage on the corners. And from a streets department standpoint, I don't like those, and will voice my opinion when it comes to that, to do away with those and just have the street curves. I understand they're picking up more frontage for more lots, but they're paying from a snow removal and street maintenance perspective. So
Thanks for sharing. I just wondered an opinion. I appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
So let's kind of discuss what other planning concerns we have with respect to the request, which I'll just circle back again, is to change the zoning from its current designation as agricultural to the R110 low density or higher density residential, or I should say single family residential. So that's what we're trying to evaluate, make a recommendation for the city council to take up once we pass this on to them. That being said, what other questions or concerns do we have to make that recommendation?
I've actually, this may be a question, I don't know, for Weston or Steve maybe. I want to clarify, when I talked about in the work meeting, Dave Rich's letter, I don't think I was referring to water issues. I know in the letter, one of you guys, it says this is 6 lots or over current code of 30 lots on a dead end street. Now, I know this has been discussed before, but I can't remember what code that is, Steve or Weston.
It's referencing the International Fire Code.
Okay. Okay, I couldn't remember if there was other code or whatnot. It was more the city end of things for the dead end, but it is the fire code. Okay.
Nate, I've got a question for Steve. Back to your maybe opening statement there in the work session, Steve, if the planning commission here is representing the code, so to speak, we've got a recommendation from staff that says that, as I understand it, that would say that the code appears to, or codes appear to be met, and gives a favorable consideration. That said, from maybe a legal standpoint, what reasons could there be to turn a proposal down? Any ideas, thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah. If the planning commission, I mean, it's not uncommon for the planning commission to disagree with staff, and they look at the general plan and basically come up with a determination or a basis as to why it didn't comply with it. And again, you've got your planning standpoint. We talked about the concurrency as far as utilities go. Those are primarily the two things that you would look at. As the chair has pointed out, you want to ensure consistency with the surrounding properties. And I think that we're on taking consideration. Obviously, they've got the larger lots on one end of it. That can happen. But back to your question, the planning commission would have to find something else in the code for there to be a difference.
Yeah, hopefully you caught most of that, David.
Yes, some of that cut out, but I think I got the feel.
That's good. I think I caught most of it too.
Thank you, Steve.
It's that utopia fiber that the rest of us have. We're so crystal clear.
And that's why I apologize. I'm working on it, but it hasn't happened.
Can we get some down to you?
Please.
That was a great accomplishment for Morgan City as a side note. It's been wonderful. All right. Thanks for asking that question. I think that's good for all of us to hear. What else? And just
Mr.
one
Chair-
more,
Mr.
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no other comments, I would be okay to make a motion to make a recommendation if you feel that's the timing's right for that.
You are welcome to make a motion at any time. Feel free to state your motion.
Great. Then I recommend the Planning Commission move forward with a positive recommendation to the City Council to approve the rezone from agricultural to R110 single family for this RUP development.
Thank you, Mr. Hackett. Is there a second on the motion? We do not have a second on the motion. I'll pause for another couple seconds. And Steve, procedurally, what does that mean if it's not seconded?
If there's no second, basically the motion dies, and so there needs to be a countering motion.
Okay, so Jay, it appears as if the motion has died, and that might be indication that there's still more discussion to be had. And or propose a counter motion. So let's we've got Mr. Brown, Mr. Prescott, Mr. Hopkin. Any other thoughts or questions that you have about this to get to the point where you feel like you have a motion of your own to move forward with, or just further clarification on the planning issues? I'll point out the obvious. The motion was made to provide a positive recommendation to the City Council, and we didn't have anyone feel comfortable enough to second that. There must be some questions or concerns. Either you're on mute, or you're still thinking through what those questions are. But let's talk about them and make sure we make a good recommendation.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just to bring up a thought, this is something that Steve mentioned earlier. Just the idea, and this is not to sway one way or the other, but just to provide an option for the commission to consider. You can propose or make the recommendation that the City Council provide a favorable recommendation, but you can also state your concerns to the City Council and state that, this does meet the zone. We're providing a favorable recommendation, but we are concerned about the density, or whatever your concerns are.
Thank you. And that can be attached to the motion and as part of the recommendation. Thank you.
I point out too, Nate, it looks like there's another public hearing that the council would go through in the process.
Thank you. I didn't realize that there would be a second public hearing for that.
Seemed like I saw that on the schedule. Ty or Ray, is that correct?
Dave, I will answer that. How that process goes is that it does have a public hearing in the Planning Commission. And since we are a recommending body, there would be an additional public hearing in the City Council.
Yeah, I think if it were approved, it seemed like I saw a calendaring item that would say similar.
Currently, there has been notice sent to residents within 300 feet of this proposal that I believe is scheduled for your next City Council meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. Call out. I'm glad you asked that. I wasn't aware. It does remind me, though, of things that we've been trained on in the past, which is, as we listen to the comments and concerns in these types of public hearings, which we heard 2 months ago, the influence and the, is not to be subject to public clamor, but rather, upholding the code and ordinances of the city, which I think we're doing, and trying to do that as best we can as a body. What other concerns, or Jay, I don't know if anyone else isn't jumping in, if you wanted to try a different motion with maybe some of those concerns attached to it, or somebody else wants to take a stab at that, I'd appreciate it.
If I can just say again, I this is something I'm really struggling with here. I understand it meets the codes, and I guess they can do this, but this just seems like a lot for this particular area. I know we've discussed this before, how sometimes a property's location may affect what should be there, and this just really seems like a lot for this area.
Yeah, and I think that may be where some of the hesitation lies, is I don't think the opposition is to development and/or a project in this area. It's the density. I keep thinking about when I drive through Wasatch Shadows, and those lots aren't, we've talked about this before, those lots aren't huge either, but they're mixed up. There's a lot of variety, and the way the neighborhood is developed, it's kind of come together in a cohesive way with that variety. But it was a big enough development that it allowed for that, and didn't feel like an island being plopped into the middle of other uses. And I guess maybe that's for me what I keep thinking about it. I'd like to have that type of density, and I recognize that the general plan allows for what the applicant's asking for, and so along those lines it feels a little bit like my hands are tied, yet these concerns are real planning concerns, that it's not just a matter of approving a project. It's does this give us an opportunity as a commission to, as was referenced in the working session, to maybe do some things with the code where we can help ensure that the future developments have that more cohesive look and feel, despite what on paper they can legally do. And again, that's just where I struggle with the same thing, Lance, and that's why I think there's some hesitation on this project.
And if I can add, I know this isn't a role, I just still have a hard time with the kind of unintended consequences from this, with the access up and down the island road. And I understand that code wise it fits and it's right, but I have a really hard time adding that much to this particular area all at once. And the way lots have been selling around here, it will be all at once.
Thank you for your comments. Other comments and/or actions that members of the commission would like to take at this time?
Well, since nobody wanted to vote for favorable, I'll make a motion that we recommend to the city council that they don't approve it.
We have a motion on the table to provide an unfavorable recommendation to the city council. Is there a second for that motion?
Withdrawn.
That motion dies as well. I don't want to be adding editorial comment here, but But I think there's some unresolved things that maybe we should talk through, so we feel like we can get past the impasse. There may be more than just you, Mr. Brown, feeling like an unfavorable recommendation would be warranted. But that term "warranted" has to, has to have a pretty solid backing behind it. And maybe if you wanted to share why you're recommending the unfavorable recommendation, that might help us get to the root of some of these issues that we could then move forward with.
I just don't feel it fits there. Public excluding. I mean, I don't listen to public clamor. I've been taught that from day one. I do my own homework and I look at it. I'm concerned. Many different things, and then I see a concept of we're trying to pigeonhole every all these small lots in there. I just don't think it's what our city needs. And I think it's too bad that we haven't addressed the general plan before now. That doesn't, I don't ever see that as the city center. I just don't think that fits in. I mean, yeah, the railroad tracks are there, but we're not going to bring back a steam engine because it doesn't fit in. So I just don't think that that's in the economic argument that everybody needs an opportunity to. Every developer uses that argument. That's why we have high density housing over by the State Street and different things. I don't think this is the place to have high density. So that's my take on it, and that's how I stand. And I mean, to Mr. Alexander's point, if we're already, if we don't have a right to vote, I guess my question would be, why are we doing it then?
Well, like I said, the reason that you go through this process is so that you can see inadequacies from the history and make those recommendations. On the other side of the coin, you have a property owner that has the right to rely upon your code as it exists at the time they make their application. And whether you think that it's a mistake or an oversight in the code, remedy, but you can't do so retroactively. And so that's something that you need to be aware of.
Can I abstain then?
You're actually placed on the planning commission to
well, I guess I could resign right now.
Well, but then what you're doing is depriving the community of your input. So obviously, I'm going to note that my connection is stable. You're depriving the community of your input while you have those concerns. And going forward, you're the planning commission. Not only do you look currently, but you're to be looking at future, as Commissioner Jay had said earlier, Jay Ackett. And so, I mean, resignation, abdicating the responsibilities, that's something, again, you're depriving the community of your input and hopefully your foresight.
But you're telling me I don't have that because it's already in code, and like Mr. Alexander said, I mean, anyway, I just feel like this is kind of a rubber stamp process. If the code's already there, we don't get to look at different things for safety concerns and different things. So yeah. Well, I have huge concerns over it. So I don't want to be in 20 years. I don't want to be the guy that I don't want my name to be on something that didn't work or doesn't fit into the community. So,
and I guess that's the question that I have. You know, as you've talked, Mr. Brown and Mr. Garside with your commentary as well, reconciling the very real uses that are adjacent to this property that are not consistent against what the general plan, which is dated, calls for. And it allows the R110. And so that's something that the applicant has petitioned us to move forward with. which I recognize that's a legal right of the developer. That being said, it is inconsistent with the adjacent properties that are also zoned, even some of them at a higher density, R18, but they're not being used that way. And I guess reconciling that is what maybe we're struggling with a little bit, and on what that means as far as moving forward with any type of recommendation, and or is there any wiggle room at all that would prevent a favorable recommendation, or is all of this just a learning that we need to take our lumps and recognize that, well, if we want to stop this, we've got to change the code. And it's not about stopping a development, it's about the density of the development. At least that's what I'm hearing. My concerns aren't converting from an agricultural use to a residential use. It's the density, and I wouldn't be as concerned about the density if the adjacent properties were all being used at a more dense usage right now, but they're not. And so we're building something that knowingly is inconsistent right out the gate. It's not that down the road it becomes that way, or in 20 years, it's that way immediately. And that's the part that I'm struggling to reconcile. I don't know if anyone can comment on that.
I fully concur.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I totally understand the position of feeling like your hands are tied, and maybe Steve will want to comment on this after I've said this, but your recommendation holds weight to the city council. So although you feel like your hands are tied to provide a positive recommendation because you're representing the code, and the agenda before you does meet the code, your conditions that you tie to it, or your recommendations with conditions of concern, and whatever those concerns look like, or even recommendations that the city council find a way to address the density through a development agreement, decrease the density, those types of items, and expression to the city council speaks volumes. And they do have a little bit more authority to dictate what they approve, rather than the position you're in to just approve what's allowed and not allowed in the code.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jay.
Hey, Jay.
I think this is an awesome moment, although it feels really challenging and stressful and like we're on a cliff here or something like that. I think it's a really important moment, because I would assume a lot of, like Jim, I love Jim. He's one of the best dudes I know, but when he probably moved to Morgan, if he wasn't born here, sees Morgan in a certain way, and he wants to live in Morgan in a certain way. And it's the reason I moved here. But also at the same time, we are responsible for a vision of the future, right? And no matter how much we would love to have fields and horses forever, it's not going to happen. Density is coming. People are coming. They're going to kill us. Just like he said, as soon as those lots go for sale, they're going to all be sold. So it's more responsible for us to try to figure out how to shape that versus to sit here and fight it. I think we have a problem we're running into right now. You would like to say, I don't want to vote for it. But as far as I can tell in this code, there's no basis to say no. So the better argument would be, how can we shape that different in the future? Not be fighting against it right now, but shaping it in the future. And all I can really, what's coming to my heart and to my mind is, man, we love Morgan for its space and its clean air and its lack of people, but holy crap, that is not going to stay the same at all. And at some point, we can't do anything about it. We can't stop people from coming here. And so the best thing we can do is just try to shape the future, really. So I love this moment, and I love your passion, Jim, and I love you guys, but I still haven't heard an argument really why, a reasonable argument why we shouldn't pass this. I feel like it's just kind of a personal opinion, and I appreciate your opinion. I do. I love your passion, but I feel like it's a problem we can't solve in this moment. And so I just want to leave that with you.
Go ahead, Lance. Look like you're going to say something. If you were, you just froze up on me.
He's on mute.
I bumped the mute button. I guess I'm curious. I don't know if it was Weston or Steve that talked about this. I think Weston just touched on it again. How do you phrase a motion for approval, but how do you voice our concerns to the city council that we have? I feel like code-wise it does matter. I know they talked about, develop agreements. They can try and shape this, maybe trim it down a little bit. As a city employee, I potentially see, looking at that drawing, possibly a few lots being lost as they, as staff, public works staff reviews it. I think it may trim down a little bit. But how do you make a motion, I guess is what I'm meaning, to that we can voice our concerns with this, because I do feel like it meets code. We don't have a good reason not to, but I would like to pass our concerns along and make sure the city council is well aware of our concerns.
Yeah, you can specifically enumerate those right in the motion. You can say, our recommendation is that we do this. However, these are the concerns we want the city council to address, and you can enumerate them one by one. And let me go back to Jim's comment before. So, I talked about planning, look at the future. So basically what you is make sure that 20 years from now, a planning commissioner sitting in your chair won't be in a position that you're in. You're sitting in that chair feeling uncomfortable because of what a prior commission recommended and a prior city council has approved. And so that's the code that you represent. And now as a planning commission, you have the opportunity, especially as the general plan is being studied, is to lay that framework for future commissions and future councils. Anyway, did I answer your question, Mr. Prescott?
Yeah, now is it appropriate for me to ask and say, as far as a couple items, can I ask and say, I'm not even sure how to word this, how to ask the other commission members what they would like to see on, I guess, just a real quick, short, abbreviated list as part of the motion we pass on to the city council. Is that appropriate to do something like that?
Oh, sure. Or you can go ahead and make your motion and they can do friendly amendments, adding what might be in their mind.
So we could make a motion and then voice your concerns, and then basically go around and anyone could add an amendment to that motion then.
Yes, sir.
And before you jump on that, there's a question I wanted to ask first. And I just want to clarify why I'm asking. This isn't because I want to table things again and have a third conversation about the same stuff. I'd like to close this out and make a recommendation as much as anybody. But the applicant, Mr. Rupp, mentioned something in his opening that I was thinking about. And that is that at the end of the last conversation, there might have been a miscommunication or unclear on what and why we tabled. And the minutes read like this. Nathan asked the applicant if they would consider changing the zoning designation to an R120, meaning minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet instead of the application of R110 minimum lot size. The commission, along with the applicant, discussed the consideration with the conclusion that the commission would table the application until the applicant had time to process and review the concerns presented. So the interim 2 months, from my perspective, has been that time to process and review the concerns that were presented, which are basically the same concerns that we're hearing today. My question is this. It sounded like when Mr. Rupp was opening that there was a miscommunication. He was waiting for something for the commission to come back with something for you, when in reality, my perspective is we were waiting for you to come back to us with either you've considered it and you're asking the same thing, which is what's before us today, or you considered it and you changed things. My question is, with this clarification, would that have changed anything, or would you move forward exactly as you've put in the application today?
I was the one who requested the continuance. The commission did not table the discussion until I asked for a continuance going forward. And second, while we did not understand the commission was making a specific request, we certainly considered that as an option, changing the application for a less dense zoning requirement. We have chosen not to go that direction because by requesting the R110, we are, as we understand it, and which seems to be the case, we are within the codes or our legal rights to do so. And so that's our position.
I would see if you can just mute for a second.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rupp. I just wanted to clarify that to see if that would change anything. And you're still muted.
Another point that might be made is certainly it is just a concept plan. There is every possibility that in order to getting everything so that it fits exactly the code for the infrastructure and the frontage and all the other things that you've discussed, that the number of lots will go down, and that as one lot has to be removed, that property would be added to another lot. And so the density, if anything, the potential density is going to go down, not go up, moving forward with a positive recommendation.
Exactly.
Thank you. Let me come back to you, Mr. Prescott. I interrupted your line of thinking with that question. You were asking procedural questions about making a motion.
Yeah, I think they kind of covered it. That was appropriate, to how that worked. But I think they answered that where anybody could amend the motion with any other concerns. So I think that covers that.
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment? This is Ty. So not just for this, I don't want to interfere, but I have a comment about the general plan update, because this point moving forward, we can't assume that the general plan is going to change one way or the other in any particular part of the city. So we can't make decisions. We have to base everything off of what is currently written, because I love the discussion back and forth too, but that also is just another indicator that the general plan isn't going to turn out like any one person envisions right now, whatever those recommendations are. And so I'm looking forward to the general plan update as well, but as a planning commission, I just don't want to go too far down any road where we envision that, oh yeah, when we update the general plan, it's going to look like I currently envision it, because there's some zones that haven't even been considered in our current plan that are less restrictive than what we're dealing with. And so anyway, I deal with this on a daily basis as a administrator at the city, is I have to go off of whatever is written, whatever agreement was made 20 or 50 years ago. Whatever I require of people, it is difficult, but we do have those because that's what we've already communicated to the public as our standard, and we just have to live with them for the most part. But we do gain the perspective and try and make improvements down the road. So.
Appreciate that reminder, Ty. Thank you for that. I do have one question that I've asked 3 different ways, and I just want to be more clear. As far as the allowance in the general plan, and to your point, Ty, as is outlined today, the applicant's request is well within the legal right. My question is with respect to adjacent uses that are subject to that same general plan, but have come to fruition and are physically developed, that is no longer consistent with that general plan. That's I guess my question is, does that have any basis at all in this conversation, or is that just a nice observation? And I guess that's addressed to either Weston or Steve, who can speak.
I wouldn't say that it's not consistent with the general plan, because it still is, but it is valid to say that it doesn't have the same context as the surrounding neighborhoods, that it doesn't transition the way you're wanting communities to develop. And I think that's a valid concern that you could include with your recommendation, whatever that recommendation is to the city council, for them to be aware and recognize that transition.
Thanks for that clarification. I appreciate that. At this point, it feels like we've aired out a number of the concerns that caused 2 previous motions that were opposing each other to both die. Is there at this point a new motion that someone wants to come forward with respect to the applicant's request and what we've been discussing for the past hour?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I hope I've got this figured out right, how to where it's appropriate, the way I want to do this. I'd like to make a motion for favorable recommendation to the City Council of the Rupp subdivision located at approximately 550 North and 400 West. And I would like to ask the City Council, upon receiving this recommendation, to listen to the residents' concerns and look at other maybe variables on this zoning change to address some of our concerns, which they're aware of with this zoning change.
Mr. Prescott, thank you for that motion. Do we have a second on this motion?
I second the positive recommendation.
Mr. Ackett has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on this motion prior to voting? One thing I was thinking about, Lance, is just that last comment that we heard, which would be echoing a similar concern to what you just mentioned. But the favorable recommendation, yes, but with the concerns regarding the transition uses. And with that, in my mind, as I'm kind of discussing transitions, I don't see a city that just has this perfect buffer where you've got the centric ring in the middle that's downtown, and then as you move away from the ring, it's perfectly smooth with each concentric circle. I recognize there's going to be waves and dips and in these transition and buffer areas. And by the way, I look at this from a pro-growth standpoint. I'm born and raised farm boy from Morgan, and I don't own animals. I don't intend to have a horse. This isn't for me about preserving some country farm vision that I have. I want to see that a thriving downtown that's pedestrian friendly, that has mixed use establishments and retail and you know, maybe not high rises, but mid rises and things that's downtown. But I see, you know, as we talked about with Ty, you know, and what's on paper today and where the city boundaries are and the buffering and transitions. That's why I bring this up as a discussion item, and would just ask specifically that you know, that our concern with this development is that the density is inconsistent, you know, from a transition standpoint with the adjacent properties, and that's to me the crux of the issue with this particular proposal is the density and the inconsistency in that transition area. And if that's something that you'd be willing to accept and add as a friendly amendment as one of the concerns, then I'd like to throw that out there.
Yes, very well said, and I accept that 100%.
And Mr. Rackett, you had seconded that motion. Would you second the friendly amendment?
I would.
Again, we have a seconded motion on the table. Is there other discussion? Seeing no other discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion as outlined in the friendly amendment that was attached, please give a verbal and visual indication of your vote.
Aye.
Aye. I see Lance and me. I don't see anybody else.
Jay is aye.
Jay is aye. That's 3 of 5. Mr. Brown, Mr. Hopkin, I didn't see your votes.
Well, despite personal attacks and out of respect for Lance, I'll vote in favor.
Thank you. And Mr. Hopkin, I didn't see your vote. Need it for the record. George, you're on mute if you're speaking.
I said aye.
Okay, thank you. The motion carries. That's 5 ayes. We now have the third and final item on our agenda, which then would be the concept review for the same project. And we've already seen the concept as part of the discussion. Teresa, if you wouldn't mind just putting that on the screen for us, since that's the topic that we're to now. And again, this is not something that needs to go before the city council yet. It's just a concept review, and we can make a decision on where we're at as far as approving or not approving the concept initially. And then of course it'll continue to evolve as it goes through the development process with city staff. And if I get any of that wrong, Weston, I'm looking to you to help keep me in line on what I'm saying here. This is the proposed plan, and the applicant is looking for the concept review of this plan as drawn out currently, which is the concept that we can see. And let's open it up for discussion at this point.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jay. I think the conversation we had there earlier, I think the city prefers those less rounded corners. I think there's, some items there with frontage and things like that. I would assume that there probably needs to be some adjustment to this concept. And so I don't know how you take it from there, but I think there's some things that in general, if they could be buttoned up a little bit more desirable for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hackett. Just to note some of the things that were mentioned were the knuckles or those bulbs on the corners, the frontage, and recognizing the applicant has also indicated that as the process evolves, that and a lot may be combined here or there, that this can and will look a little bit differently as it goes through the process, but materially, as far as the total number of lots be somewhere in this neighborhood.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please jump in.
According to our engineer who did the concept.
Can I stop you one more time? You just got very quiet again.
Okay, sorry. According to our engineer who developed the concept plan, it has been developed based on your design criteria.
Is that correct?
And so we may have it wrong, but I would hope that there would be some research to find out whether the criteria that we've used to develop the concept plan is in fact part of your design criteria, or if we're mistaken and have had access to bad information.
I can't speak to that. Can someone from staff weigh in on the guidance that was provided to the applicant?
Pardon me, can you repeat that question? Can you hear me?
That would be between the respective engineers. I mean, again, this is concept, and as has been said several times, it will have to meet both engineering and planning guidelines before it goes any further.
Thank you. Other questions, thoughts, concerns based on the concept as outlined before us today?
Nate, just a question, clarification maybe on the Morgan City staff memo. It talks about the density and so forth, so we're clearly looking at the subdivision, but recommendation just is for the positive recommendation to approve the rezone request. Does it also include a positive recommendation for the concept request?
Not in the packet I received. I didn't have a staff guidance on a recommendation for item number 3 on our agenda, and I don't know if that's because this recommendation doesn't go to the city council. We can approve that directly as a commission, but I could be wrong on that assumption.
I should have provided a recommendation for you, and my recommendation would be that staff approve the concept plan. And you are correct; it doesn't get forwarded, so you wouldn't be recommending approval or denial. You would actually be approving.
So in my mind, it's looking at this concept plan, recognizing there's going to be further conversations with engineering, further discussions regarding the existing codes, how those are interpreted to be represented accurately in what ends up being the preliminary and then ultimately the final concept for this project. Is there anything that stands before us that we can give guidance and help influence how that process goes based on what we're seeing and as part of the development? And I guess that's part of the question, but as we evaluate this. And that's addressed to the commission, the other commissioners.
A lot of my concerns, naturally will be, as I am also city staff, a lot of my concerns as far as the concept will be, just brought up as city staff reviews this. And when there's no other discussion, I could make a motion on this as well.
Okay. Well, I may call on you to do just that, but let's see what other discussion there is. I am interested. I know this is there's a lot of passion around this project, which can be a good thing. And let's use some of that passion to maybe influence, given the parameters and constraints that we have to operate within with the rezone that we've recommended to the city council. What would you recommend with respect to this concept? And from my, sorry, I don't know if someone's just jumping in, but from my perspective, as I look at it as, upholding what is appropriate within R110 designation, once the street planning issues, the infrastructure issues, the frontage issues are worked out conceptually, this seems to align with that. And recognize we'll get into some deeper conversation as we see more of the details. So that's my initial stance as I look at it. Lance, you may be called on earlier rather than later.
And I guess I was just thinking it's been so long since we've really done this. We were doing this almost monthly. It felt like if we approve a concept tonight, is this something that we see again? I can't remember. Does this come back before us and we see it again for final approvals, correct?
You'll see it at least one more time, if not two more times, because there's still I'm sorry, Weston, I'm sure you're going to jump in on that. There will be a preliminary approval and then there will be a final approval. So absolutely, you'll see this at a minimum one more time.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Like I say, it's been a while since we've done this.
Any following concerns from other commissioners as you look at this proposed project? Seeing no further discussion at this point, Mr. Prescott, you'd mentioned you were prepared to make a motion. Are you still in that same mindset?
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to approve the concept in a rough subdivision located at approximately 5 North and 400 West.
Do we have a second on this motion?
I'll second that.
Mr. Hackett has seconded the motion. Any discussion with respect to this motion prior to voting?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Go ahead, Teresa.
A concept approval would be pending zoning and approval for the city council. It might need to be noted in the motion.
Thank you for that reminder as well. So that being said, Mr. Prescott, if you wouldn't mind accepting a friendly amendment that this is contingent upon the city council approving the zoning change.
Yes.
I second that.
Thank you. So we are still discussing this motion. Any other discussion items? Let's vote at this point to approve the motion on the table is to approve the concept plan as outlined, contingent upon the city council changing the zoning as the applicant has requested. All in favor of this motion, please indicate and verbally let me know so I can try to catch it. I don't know why I can't see everybody. Let me change my view here.
Jay is I.
Lance is aye.
All right.
George is I.
That's 4 ayes, including me,
Nay.
and 1 nay. Motion carries 4-1. Thank you for the conversation on that. We will see this again. And that takes us to the conclusion of our agenda items for today. Before closing and adjourning for the day, are there any final thoughts that anyone would like to add?
I just, if I could, Mr. Chair, when Mr. Brown was discussing his position, he used the term in spite of personal attacks, and I hope that nothing I said was interpreted that way. I mean, I've had nothing but respect for Mr. Brown and appreciate the perspective that he brings. And, you know, again, there was never an intent to do any type of personal attack, and that was interpreted that way, then I'll apologize in front of everybody that's here. That was clearly not my intent. I think that I worked with the commission enough to hope that they understand that my motivation and my direction is based on the best interest of the city as a whole. So again, I apologize if they were perceived as attacks.
We would like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for your time and, interestingly enough, for the integrity with which you approached the process. It's the process itself is a wonderful thing, and I'm grateful that there are processes and that things aren't just done arbitrarily. So thank you for your time and your efforts in our behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Rupp. Any other closing comments?
I share Steve's same sentiments. Again, anything that I've said to Mr. Brown that may be offensive, Jim, you know I love you. And I'm here with the opportunity to serve. We don't get paid for this. We do this out of love for where we live. And so nothing personal to anybody. What I'm doing here is out of love for my city, despite the people involved.
I'd just like to add, ever since this packet came across my email and I opened it up and looked at it, it's been a pretty difficult thing for me to wrap my head around, and knowing that it fits the code and everything fits. And I look forward to this general plan, and I understand how difficult it is to have a subdivision move right into your backyard. And but property owners have rights, and I appreciate the process, even though it's been a difficult one for me.
Yeah, if I may reiterate what's been said about that process, that I appreciated a lot, and that was we have an opportunity, as Mr. Garside had mentioned previously, these difficult decisions and the conversation that we had. If it's our opportunity to do something if we don't like it, and look at the code and make recommendations to the city council, so that 20 years from now, the next commission that's sitting in our shoes is building off of that groundwork. And so that's the call to action. If there's heartache with respect to some of the decisions that we made tonight, then let's take that as a call to action to put something on the agenda, and let's work through it as a commission and talk through what we would recommend for the future to make this even better process for the next projects that come in.
And you don't have to wait for the plan. If you see something right now, for example, if you think that your definition of low density is too broad, then the recommendation of the city council saying, you know what, low density should be from here to here as opposed to from here to here. And so again, you don't have to wait for that. If you see some lacking, then let's put some language together and then make a recommendation to the council.
With that, I will declare the meeting adjourned, and we'll meet again on the third Tuesday of December. Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy your Thanksgivings.